everyone, it's Miss Diston. Here is a video lecture on immigration. For reference, this lecture is based off page 278 to 285 in American Pageant. As you watch, take notes on the side as we practiced in class. There will be a few moments where I will ask you to pause and answer specific questions, but please take as many notes as you need. We're going to begin by talking about population growth. The American population was multiplying at an amazing rate. By 1860, America had gone from 13 states to 33 states, and it was the fourth most populous country in the Western world. Population growth affected the whole country. It led to the creation of new cities. In fact, America went from just 2 cities in 1790 to about 43 cities by 1860. These cities were often overpopulated. Pause the video and answer the following question. What problems might arise from population growth, especially in cities? As you learned from last year, overpopulation leads to new problems like smelly slums, inadequate policing, impure water, rats, poor sanitation, improper garbage disposal. They become not a very healthy place to live. Why was there such a large population growth? The number one reason was high birth rates. Americans were simply having more children. But it was also assisted by an influx of immigrants in the 1840s and 1850s. And that's what we'll be looking closely at today. Why did immigrants come over to America? A big reason was Europe was running out of room. The population in Europe doubled in the 1800s, and they now had what's called a surplus population. Basically, too many people that they can house, take care of, and give jobs to. Many people were displaced and jobless and looking for better opportunities. There were also a lot of conditions in America that drew immigrants in. America was known as the land of freedom and opportunity. Immigrants who already moved to America would send letters home describing things like this letter from John Doyle, describing things like low taxes, cheap land, and even 3 meat meals a day, very luxurious. Also in America, unlike most of Europe, there was no hierarchy, not a state church, and no mandatory military service. Plus, coming to America was even easier now because of inventions. Most importantly, the transoceanic steamship meant that Europeans could now cross the Atlantic speedily and cheaply. The trip used to take 10 to 12 weeks. Now it could be done in 10 to 12 days. Pause the video and answer the following question. Briefly summarize, what were the major causes of immigration? Let's look closely at 2 groups. There are 2 major groups of immigrants in the mid-19th century, Irish and Germans. In just 2 decades, over 1.5 million Irish and 1.5 million Germans came to America. Let's look at why those 2 groups came. Irish immigrants. Number one cause for Irish immigration was the potato famine that hit Ireland in the mid-1840s. This was devastating, since much of the population farmed and ate potatoes. Many in Ireland starved to death, and those that could fled to the United States and other places for a better life. Once in America, the Irish had some trouble settling in. Many of them had few skills and no money. They were too poor to move west, so as you can see on the map, many of them settled in cities on the East Coast, like Boston and New York. The Irish had trouble adjusting once in America. One big reason was that they were Catholic in a mostly Protestant nation, and I'll talk more on that later. The Irish were also poorly educated, and so many people didn't want to hire the Irish. Signs that said "No Irish need apply" were really common in windows. Much of the work the Irish did find was the jobs that no one really wanted, and this would lead them into conflict with free African Americans who were also competing for those jobs. and the two groups were often compared together and hated each other, as you can see in this racist cartoon, which we'll talk more about as we move along in history. The Irish do create organizations to protect themselves, most famously the Ancient Order of Hibernians. They were created to assist Irish immigrants, since basically no one else would. Politicians do eventually realize that support from the Irish will give them a strong voting bloc, so they start to help out the Irish and woo the Irish votes in cities, and we'll look more at that especially after the Civil War. Pause the video and answer the following question. What reasons caused the Irish to face discrimination? Let's look at the Germans. There were two main reasons German immigrants came between 1830 and 1860. Number one, most immigrants were farmers displaced by crop failures. However, a small group were political refugees trying to flee the autocratic rule from Germany. Germany had a failed revolution in 1848. Anyone remember that from last year? And so some revolutionaries fled to America, the land of democracy, and to escape persecution. The Germans came over with much more than the Irish did, and most of them pushed into the Midwest. As you can see on the map, you'll see a lot of them end up in what is today Wisconsin. The Germans overall face less discrimination. Most are Protestant, they're better educated, and they're spread out. They're not concentrated in one area. One conflict they do come in is that the Germans bring with them beer, and we'll see conflict between German immigrants and the temperance movement, which we'll talk about more when we study temperance. Pause the video and answer the following question. What did the Germans have in common with Irish immigrants? And what were the main differences? You can use this cartoon showing discrimination between both groups as help to answer the question. Lastly, we're going to talk about nativism. American nativists were angered by the influx of immigrants. Nativists worried that immigrants would outbreed, since they often had a lot of children, and outvote those that were native to America. And remember, we're not talking about the actual Native Americans. Nativists were upset because immigrants, they felt, were taking jobs from Americans. They also were opposed to the influx of Roman Catholicism, with the Irish and some Germans, mostly Irish. Americans were worried about papal power. There was this idea that you couldn't be loyal to the Pope and live in a democracy, that would somehow allow the Pope to influence American democracy. American nativists formed the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner in 1849, which soon became known as the American Party, a political third party. They were often known as the Know-Nothing Party. They got this name because members commonly responded, "I know nothing," when asked a political question. The American Party wanted restrictions on immigration and restrictions on becoming citizens, since they felt these groups were a threat to their way of life. Many nativists were also persuaded by fallacies, basically propaganda spread against immigrants. Most famously was Maria Monk's Awful Disclosures, which was published about, allegedly, life in a nunnery. This will lead to further discrimination. I wish I could read you a quote from the Awful Disclosures, but they're actually pretty much so awful, they're not appropriate for school. Violence did occasionally break out. We're going to see some Catholic convents burned in Boston. And in 1844, there's a fight between Irish and nativists that doesn't really end until two Catholic churches are burned in Philadelphia. Pause the video and answer the following question. How did some Americans respond to immigration? What were their fears? Thank you for listening to this video. Remember, it's a trial and we'll see how it goes. Please make note now in your notes of any questions and I'll discuss them in class and answer them. Have a really good day.